What is up? Welcome to Vikings Vantage presented by Pepsi. Gabe Henderson here from the Vikings Entertainment Network alongside Chris Corso and our guest from The Athletic. His name is Arif Hasan. He joins us today. And Arif, I'm so excited to talk to you about Vikings football. But before we get started, for Vikings fans who don't know you, who is Arif Hasan and what do you do with The Athletic?
I've been covering the Vikings for a while now. It's hard to keep track, 7, 8, 9 years. I just recently moved to the Athletic a couple of years ago, covering the Vikings for them. I also do a little bit of national work. I do a little bit of draft coverage for them. And I don't know, it's just been a blast. I've been through a bunch of the crazy Viking seasons that we've experienced here.
And it's only going to get crazier this offseason, right? I mean, this is arguably the most unique offseason that we have seen in recent memory. So I guess for starters, right, how realistic, with the salary cap being the way it is, how realistic is it that the Vikings will make a big splash in free agency this year?
Yeah, I wrote a recent article about, if they make a splash, who are the players they might target? And obviously there's a bunch of tantalizing names on there, people who've even, done a little bit of damage against the Vikings too, that, maybe you can convince them to come over. But yeah, honestly, it's not that realistic at all. The Vikings are well known to be a little bit over the cap. They've already had to make a couple of really tough moves in order to get back under the cap. So I just don't know that they'll be able to do it. There is a pathway to do it. You have to be very careful. But you make a lot of sacrifices along the way. I don't know if the Vikings are kind of willing to do that. I don't even know if it's wise to do that. So, I'd say this is kind of, for the Vikings, probably an offseason where they're going to try and make a bunch of, value moves, try and make sure that they can find as many players on the market that are being undervalued by the rest of the market, give them a chance to earn a little bit of extra money when the cap kind of frees up again. Maybe a couple of one-year contracts. I expect we'll see a lot of those in this year's free agency, just because players also know that the cap is going to go up after this. And so they want to hit the market again. So there's a lot of opportunities to find bargain bin, kind of prove it years for players.
We were talking before the show here, and it's crazy. You've been covering the Vikings for like 8 or 9 years now, probably longer than that when it comes to just blogging about the Vikings growing up locally here around the area. But you've seen a lot of Kyle Rudolph's 10-year career with the Minnesota Vikings. So what was it like covering him, and how crazy is it to see him go? It's almost like he's like Mr. Minnesota at this point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sometimes you forget that he's like from like Cincinnati, right? Like he's
I said that, like, it's crazy. You forget that he was like not from here. He's not a local, because I mean, he's embedded himself in the community. Like,
embedded is the perfect. It was the word I was just about to use.
People think he's Adam Thielen.
Right. Yeah, exactly. He might as well have grown up in Detroit Lakes. He's made the community a huge priority here in Minnesota. And that's been pretty evident. I mean, he started out making sure that he could make an impact in the community. It was one of his priorities when he came in 2012. So, he bought into the organization. He feels like the organization bought into them. And he's right. When they drafted him, they didn't have, a quote unquote need at tight end, right? They had a pretty good set of tight ends, and he came in, knowing that the organization valued him, and he kind of paid them back. He's been really, fantastic cover. I remember, drafting him, I think, what was his second year in the NFL, my fantasy league, knowing that he was probably going to be a big touchdown guy, and I think he got like 12 touchdowns that year. So I've always had a pretty positive association with him since then. But he's always provided kind of a unique piece, both on the field in terms of what he can do, really great on third down, really great in the red zone, and then I think tremendously just kind of off the field, the stuff that he was able to do, especially with the Children's Hospital, just incredible stuff.
Well, I guess with that move, all eyes point to Irv Smith Jr. and Tyler Conklin. So with their unique skill set, do you think this offense will try to tailor that? Will you think it'll be more spread out now that Irv Smith Jr. can be more flexible? Kyle Rudolph couldn't do as much mobility-wise that Irv Smith Jr. could do.
Yeah, no, that's going to be an interesting question. I think it really depends on whether or not they invest more in a third tight end so that they can have a backup if they decide to do 2 tight end stuff, or if they invest very seriously in another wide receiver so that they can do, kind of spread stuff a little bit, more capably. And there's a bunch of players, especially hitting the free agency market, that have worked with Keenan McCardell. So there's a connection that they can make and maybe be able to grab a couple of these, really nice players that can round out a roster. And they could go either direction. I think that there's a really good argument. I mean, we've seen a bunch of really good 2 tight end offenses over the years from a bunch of different teams. We know that 3 wide receiver is something that's becoming, pretty in vogue. And so whichever way they can do it, but I think that they want to go in the tight end direction because I think they really like the flexibility of having players on the field that no matter what play you call, they'll be able to execute it. Irv Smith's a really good blocker. Tyler Conklin has improved pretty dramatically since he entered the NFL as a blocker. And so, you go out there, you see a look that you don't like, you change from a pass to a run, and you know that play is going to be executed pretty well. I think they really liked that flexibility. So I think that they'll stick with the 2 tight end stuff, especially given, the last 5 games of the season, how well Tyler Conklin performed. I think 30 yards a game in those last 5 games, really incredible stuff for a guy that, drafted in the late rounds, didn't have a ton of opportunity just because of the talent ahead of him to make a big impact. And now I don't think they'd be able to make the Kyle Rudolph move if they didn't trust Tyler Conklin, much less, of course, Irv Smith, who's got a ton of speed. Again, like I said, he's a really great blocker, and he can be a really great weapon. The ways they used him at Alabama were incredible. I mean, he was an end run guy, even though they had some really fantastic, really fast receivers. He was an arc blocker. He did H-back stuff. I mean, just a ton of stuff. It lined up out wide, lined up in the slot, lined up in line, lined up as a fullback sometimes. So there's all kinds of stuff they can do with Irv Smith. And I think that they're, really excited to get some of that stuff going.
I want to get into free agency for sure as we kind of let off the show, but I think this just perfectly transitions into the Clint Kubiak offense, because you were talking about all the different things that you can do with these tight ends. And obviously the Vikings have had kind of a carousel when it comes to the offensive coordinator coaching position with this team over the years. You've been here, you've seen it from Norv Turner to Pat Shurmur, all the different coaches that we've had at that position. So in your opinion, what is a Clint Kubiak offense? What does it look like? What's the run to pass ratio? How's he using the tight ends? I want it all, man.
I wish I had a crystal ball. It's always difficult to tell with somebody who hasn't had a ton of experience at the position before. But I think, part of the reason that they stayed in house when they signed Stefanski, they stayed in house with Gary Kubiak, and now they stayed in house with Clint Kubiak, because I think they like what they're going to get. They know what they're going to get, and that is something that they've come to value a lot when they have to find another offensive coordinator, because they keep on getting hired out or finding kind of other things that they need to do. So I think that we're probably not going to see a significant change. Obviously, the terminology is going to be the same, but I think from a philosophical play calling perspective, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a little bit more pass happy stuff. I know that Gary tried to throw the ball a little bit more at the beginning of the season, knew that the team was a little bit more geared towards a run forward offense, and so that's kind of what they stuck with, and that worked out a little bit better for them. I wouldn't be surprised if Clint is going to attempt to kind of feel out what the offense is going to be good at and attempt to focus on that. But I think at the start, I wouldn't be shocked if we saw a little bit more in terms of throwing the ball around, a little bit more in terms of seeing what a 3 wide receiver set can do, just because we know what a 2 tight end set can do. We know what a run heavy offense can do, and kind of the more you can do, the more you'll be able to have answers in the playoffs, come that time. So I think we'll see a little bit more in terms of throwing the ball around. I think we'll see a little bit more in terms of, kind of lighter personnel out there to be able to throw the ball a little bit more efficiently. But I think for the most part, it's going to be the same kind of base offense. And, it was a really good offense last year, so you don't want to really mess with it too much.
Yeah, top 5 running offense. I mean, Dalvin Cook, he can pretty much do everything. And for Clint Kubiak, a guy that started out with wide receivers, moved to the quarterback position, and now is the OC. You got Andrew Janoko, who coached the receivers and now is the quarterback's coach. You would think there would be more of an affinity to pass the ball, right? Just from the knowledge of their background. Would you think?
Yeah, I think that, given kind of the experience that they've had, that's going to be appealing to them, and it's going to be something that they're much more comfortable with. But I think when you've got somebody like Rick Dennison with you on the offensive line, who can help coordinate your run game, you always want to lean on somebody who's got a little bit more experience than you. And I think that interplay, that kind of relationship that they have, a lot of times offensive line coaches are run game coordinators in effect. And I think being able to kind of lean on some of the more experienced players in the building, or the more experienced coaches in the building, will allow you to kind of construct a game plan that's going to be a little bit more balanced anyway. So yeah, for sure. I absolutely think that they're going to lean on that passing game just because it's something they're comfortable with. But I don't think they're ever going to get too far away from it because of the people that they have relationships with in the building, and because of what they know works, for sure.
Yeah, I think it works when you give Justin Jefferson the ball just about as much as
yeah, right. Yeah, do that as much as possible. You'll be fine.
That's for sure. But looking at the tough decision with Kyle Rudolph and obviously what's coming up here in free agency, what do you think is going to be the hardest decision for the Vikings front office when it comes to either bringing a player back or deciding to part ways with that player? What's the toughest decision Rob Brzezinski coming up here?
I think the toughest one is Riley Reiff. I mean, Rick Spielman's right. He's coming off of the best year I've ever seen, not just in a Vikings uniform. I think it's the best year that Reiff has ever had. And the unfortunate, reality is that his cap number is remarkably high. They do have a number of players that, personally, I think are better fit at tackle than they are, elsewhere along the offensive line. And so when you've got a player that you drafted in the second round in Ezra Cleveland that can play tackle, when you're thinking about maybe even Brown and Neal is so talented, maybe we want him at left tackle. Riley Reiff is definitely, he's made his chops as a tackle. You don't want to kind of waste the talent that he has by putting him at another position. You have to make those difficult decisions, and that Cleveland is somebody that you think can develop into that kind of guy. And you have to figure out, hey, we saw a really great year from Riley Reiff. He was our most consistent offensive lineman. What are we going to get if we decide to move on from him and move Ezra Cleveland and attempt to focus on, bolstering the interior offensive line? That's going to be tough. At the same time, a $15 million cap hit is in this particular specific cap environment is a little bit untenable. And it's a decision they made when they decided to extend him in order to make some room for the Yannick Ngakoue trade, which is, a tough decision to make then too. So, the Vikings have had issues along the offensive line for every year I've covered them for a decade now. And it's going to be tough to make a move that might make that offensive line worse, but because of the realities of the cap, might also be necessary. I mean, obviously, if they can extend him and restructure him, et cetera, that might be ideal. But at that point, you are kicking the can down the road, and they've done a lot, and they're kind of dealing with that right now.
Another thing, you talked about Rick's press conference. Another thing Rick said is he expects some of the bigger name guys to still get some of those big name contracts. It's that middle area, those guys who aren't the superstar level, those guys trying to figure out what their future, what lies for their future. So my question for you is, do you expect less teams to make less? Do you expect teams to make less moves in free agency this year?
I think they're going to have to make more, because I think that we're going to see so many players hit the free agency market that they're going to have to go back into it in order to kind of fill out their roster. And so teams will have to be aggressive about, acquiring players or even reacquiring players that they had to let go. And again, I think it'll mostly be, 1-year contracts, just because players will want to hit free agency again after they kind of prove the kind of talent that they have. So we'll see, I think, a lot of movement. I think I saw one player call it a bloodbath that's going to come because of the cap situation. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of names changed on the backs of a lot of jerseys. And so I think that's what we're going to see. It's just not going to be the mega deals that we're used to seeing. Usually when we say, hey, it's an active free agency, somebody signed a $100 million contract to become the highest paid player at their position. We're probably not going to see too much of that. We're probably not going to see a ton of mega deals with a ton of guaranteed money. Even a player as established as JJ Watt signed a 2-year deal, right, with $23 million guaranteed. And that second year is not, completely guaranteed. The Cardinals can kind of let go. I'm sure, Watt has a player option that he might be able to void as well. These are the kinds of deals that I kind of expect, that players will want to be able to hit the market back again soon, and teams will need to be able to recoup their losses for making all the moves they need to in order to account for the changing cap environment.
So you were at Rick Spielman's press conference on Wednesday this week, and obviously there was a lot discussed. It was about a 28-long press conference. It's normally the one that you guys do at the NFL Combine, which obviously didn't take place this year. But my biggest question for you is, what's your biggest takeaway from Rick? I mean, I feel like we're in uncharted waters here when it comes to just the NFL offseason and all the changes that are going on. So what was your biggest takeaway from that 28-minute press conference?
Well, I think it's the one that kind of led all the headlines. The Kirk Cousins is our quarterback, which you see GMs say that a lot about the quarterbacks that they have on the roster. There's been a lot of speculation this offseason whether or not Kirk could become a trade asset. I think there have been a couple of really interesting trade scenarios that have been floated around. But you take a look at some of the pressers that people have had about the quarterbacks on the roster before they've traded them. You take a look at, for example, the Jared Goff presser, the Matthew Stafford, or I should say, the Les Snead presser, and so on. About those quarterbacks, and they weren't nearly as committed to the quarterback that they currently had on the roster. I think famously, the Jared Goff quarterback, that was like, he's currently a quarterback that is on our roster. That is accurate. It was very non-committal, but I think that, Spielman was very clear about it. He didn't just say Kirk is our quarterback. He repeated the phrase, and then he talked about how excited he was to go ahead into the season with Kirk. I think that it's just very true that they're very committed to having Cousins on the roster. And, all the rumors about the Kirk Cousins trade were coming from, the perspective of other teams. X team is interested in Kirk Cousins. I don't think we heard a single rumor that the Vikings were interested in dealing Kirk, or even that they were picking up the phone. And I think this kind of confirmed a lot of that. The Vikings are committed, and they'll have to be, because on March 19th, his 2022 salary becomes fully guaranteed. And so, if they buy in now, because they can't make a move later without, doing some pretty serious damage to their salary cap situation.
Well, that's one less move Rick Spielman has to make, but Rick Spielman has to make a move in the draft at number 14. And I was reading your article, the co-article that you did with Ben Standig, who works for The Athletic for the Washington football team. And at 14, you guys were somewhat talking about what Bucky Brooks had to say about that pick. Bucky Brooks has Devontae Smith from Alabama as the Vikings pick at 14. So if you are Rick, if Devontae Smith is at that 14th spot, are you taking him or are you trading back?
I mean, if Devontae Smith is as valued by the rest of the NFL as he is by the draft community, I'm picking up the phone. I want to see how other teams are valuing him, because if someone like him or Jamar Chase or Kyle Pitts falls to 14, which is possible, but they are all elite game changers, it seems like. I want to see what the value. I'm not necessarily automatically trading back, but if someone is offering me, a couple of firsts, the first this year and a first next year, which, we saw the Saints do that for Marcus Davenport for the Packers, right? It is possible that they'll offer to trade up with an additional first for a non-quarterback, given the talent of the players I just mentioned. And I would do that if that's something that they're offering. But if the trade isn't blowing me away, I think there's a ton of value in grabbing another first round receiver. I mean, not just because you can go into 11 personnel and be just much more effective in that situation. You've got, critical backup to, wide receiver depth has just been a problem for the Vikings. I don't think it would be in this situation. You've got a critical backup that you need in that situation. And not only that, we talk about, offensive line problems, but really pressure is a team issue. If no one is open, that's going to cause pressure. If you can't get rid of the ball quickly, that's going to cause pressure. If you've got three receivers on the field that all have, I know Adam Thielen was a tryout, but essentially all have first round talent. If you've got three receivers on the field that are all like that, someone's going to get open. It's very difficult to field three corners that have the ability to stop. I mean, that's what Dallas was thinking, right? And if you get rid of the ball quickly, or if someone's always going to be open for you, or if you've always got a hot rod available to you off of blitz, that can help deal with your pressure problem too. So you can solve some of these problems in a different direction. And I think if you've got a talent as significant as Devontae Smith or Chase or Pitts, that's something that I would explore, despite how well stocked you are. And I'm a huge probably draft your needs guy. I'm a huge needs guy, right? But and this isn't a need, but I do think that is something where you kind of want to break your rules a little bit to make sure you've got as much talent in the building as possible. And, with Justin Jefferson, Devonta Smith, you've got receivers that'll be good for the next decade. I mean, maybe Adam Thielen turns into a Jerry Rice. That'd be really cool. But you do have to worry about the fact that, he's entering this season. He's going to turn 31, I think, in August. And you're not going to get probably a decade out of him. And so having another receiver kind of step up and take that role without a ton of pressure, the same pressure that Justin Jefferson had, now you don't have to put that in anyone else. I think there's value in it. I think it's pretty unlikely. And the first thing I do is I pick up the phone, but there's a reason you would do it.
So Oregon style offense 2021. I like it.
I mean, adding another national champion like you did in Justin Jefferson with the wide receiver, I think the connection there might work if you got both those guys for Kirk Cousins to throw the ball to. But that leads me perfectly into my last question, and that's if you're on the clock at number 14, we've talked about the needs. I mean, I think I would go pass rusher, but I want to know what position you're going with. Maybe throw a name or two out there.
I mean, I would really like the Vikings to trade back. Honestly, I think that's the primary thing, because getting that second round pick is going to be huge. Spielman mentioned how much uncertainty there is this offseason without the combine, without the interviews, and you have to rely on digital interviews. And that uncertainty is going to mean that some players with a little bit of ambiguity in their profiles are going to fall, and you want to have the assets to be able to take advantage of some players that you really like that are going to fall for one reason or the other. So that's something that I would primarily look at. But if a bunch of other teams are thinking about trading down, then you're not going to get good value. So if the Vikings are kind of forced to pick at that spot, I'd like to see if either Rashawn Slater or Christian Darrisaw, make it to that, point. I've seen some mocks where, either one of those two will go at 5 because Penei Sewell went at 2. Like these are really good tackles. I mean, it's not exactly quite as good as the first round tackle class from last year, but it's quite good. And so I think that that's something that you want to get invested in. But I think primarily, those edge rushers and defensive tackles, you might want to target a little bit more just because in the rest of the draft, in the second and third rounds, those players aren't nearly as proliferate as you do have at guard and tackle. You've got some really good talented guards, tackles, wide receivers, and safeties in the second, third, and fourth rounds. You don't really have that at defensive tackle, and you kind of don't have that at edge rusher. So if Christian Barmore is there at 14, I'd be pretty excited about that. Out of all of these really talented first round edge rushers that we've got, with Kwity Paye and Gregory Rousseau, possibly Jalen Phillips, possibly, Azeez Ojulari from Georgia. I think I like Kwity Paye the most just from a traits perspective, and none of these guys were, super productive, but they've all got a bunch of these traits that people from the Vikings tend to love. Great athletes, really explosive. They tend to emphasize explosion more than anything else. Then Kwity Paye also has just this remarkable agility and a lot of fight. He's got a ton of hustle, and I think that they love that kind of stuff. In the Vikings building, and I think giving someone like Kwity Paye to Andre Patterson would lead to a ton of great, and he wouldn't even have to start right away. I mean, they just signed Stephen Weatherly. They've got, Ifedi Adenabo. They've got, DJ Wanham. They've got Kenny Willekes, a bunch of players that can compete for a rotational or a starting spot that might make introducing that first round edge rusher a little bit easier.
Well, we have talked about a lot of topics in this podcast so far, so I'm going to end it with this. With everything that we've talked about, with how the Vikings can build the future and build for right now, what is your way to early 2021 Vikings prediction?
Oh, man. I mean, this is a team, I can see them basically do anything. But I think that by default right now, they're the second team in the division, and hopefully they can overtake and become the best team in the division. I think my way too early prediction is that they find a way to get that wild card spot that was eluding them this last year. That probably means 10 wins. So I think that the defense is going to get a lot better because the biggest issue with the defense was the lack of experience among all the new players that became starters. That's not going to be as big a problem. And so now I think that you've got an opportunity to become a playoff worthy defense to go with that really excellent offense.
Love it. Love it. Arif Hasan, we appreciate your time today.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me.